Everybody, welcome to the first scrutiny of the year, or health scrutiny of the year. Before we start, I need to inform you that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded. So to kick things off, apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Tracy Huffer giving her apologies, and I've got Councillor Bentick substituting, and we've got David Voicey for Health Watch.
Lynn currently, our Chief Officer, is unable to attend today, so I'm representing Health Watch instead.
Thank you, David.
Wouldn't it be better if David could sit at the
Yeah.
side? Do you want to come in?
I didn't like to be presumptuous.
There's a pity, yes.
Nice. Between two ladies.
Item 2 is disclosable interest. Are there any round the table need to declare? No. Item 3 is minutes of the meeting held 12th of December. They have been circulated. Is everybody happy that they're a true record of events that went on?
I'm with this. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Seconder. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Public question time. We have one question. Tom?
Okay, so we've got a public question from Bill George. So what I'll do is I'll read out the question and I'll read out the response. Okay, so questions on the hospital transformation programme. And George's question is, the hospital transformation programme is proceeding, albeit with capital funding now at £312 million rather than £533 million required for the previous preferred option. Does the committee have sight of modelling behind the future bed and staff numbers? Members are probably aware that SAF's previous estimates of demand, ever since Future Fit began in 2014, have been consistently outstripped by real-world need. Is the committee confident that it has the information needed to scrutinise the adequacy of future care as provided by the HCP model? If not, will the committee require the data modelling behind current proposals? So the response to the question is the committee has not had sight of modelling behind the future bed and staff numbers. The task and finish group, which originally started by looking at the ambulance response times, identified that in their report that a number of areas of further consideration by this committee for Shropshire Council, for the council area issues only, and the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee for those more system-wide issues, and these are in focus for this committee and the Joint HOS. The area for further consideration pertinent to the questions includes, so this is what was identified in that report, but how does the number of acute hospital beds per head of population in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin, plus taking account of the Mid Wales population, compared to the national averages and regional averages, plus with other geographic areas that have similar demographic profiles. So that's places like Northumberland and Cornwall. For those same places, Northumberland and Cornwall, what are the numbers of reablement beds, community beds per head of population, and how does this compare to Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin area? How do the number of beds now and in the future compare to the current and projected increases in the 65 plus population and the 85 plus population? So these are all areas which have been identified by the task and finish group for further focus. But also, what is the strategy for local community-based services in the Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin areas? What needs to be in place in the community to facilitate more timely discharge from acute hospitals that is not already in place? What needs to happen to help make this occur and when? Are reablement beds in the community hospitals and beds in care homes in the right areas of the county where people who need reablement support live? Are there areas of Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin where access to community-based provision is lower? What impact does this have on people aiming to return to these areas when they are discharged? What impact does this have on other areas of the county? And what role will the virtual wards play in reducing the need for people to stay in acute hospital beds, community hospital-based rehabilitation beds, and care home beds? The areas of focus identified remain scope, the health, or this committee and the joint health overview scrutiny committee in their work programme, and will continue to be followed up with the system partners to seek answers and assurance about the availability of services to all local communities. So that's the response to the question.
Thank you, Tom. That long question, long answer.
To say anything in response to that, Chair?
Come on, Jill, I'll let you have a
Thank
quick
you,
response.
thank you very
It's a
quickly.
very long question, so a quick response.
Yeah. Shropshire is underbedded compared with the national average. It's a piece of work I did a while ago. Community hospital beds are very much at risk now. In terms of the crisis around discharge, I've been hearing recently about people being discharged from acute hospital to travel lodges, which is not ideal at all. And of course, the hospital transformation programme is being rolled out at pace. So a very impressive and comprehensive list of things that the Task and Finish group will be looking at. But I'd suggest a level of urgency because of the speed with which the transformation programme is now being driven ahead. And I think a useful starting point might well be for this committee to request the data on estimated demand and capacity, because if South has got that wrong, as they have done repeatedly in the past, we're going to be in such deep trouble in the future it doesn't bear thinking about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5, there are no member questions. Item 6, update from Joint Hosp, which was last Monday. Tom, keep you busy today.
Okay, so
Would it be possible to speak up a bit? Sorry, back here and struggling to.
So the meeting last Monday for the joint HOSC had one main item, which was focused on a follow-up around what has happened, particularly in relation to staffing in maternity services at the Shrewsbury Town Hospital Trust. So I think the committee were able to explore with quite a range of senior officers in relation to that service, what they've done, how they've gone about it, and where they see the sustainability for that service going forward. I think the committee also noted that some of the learning and developments which have been taking place in relation to maternity services were also identified as informing other areas of the hospital service. So one which they flagged was urgent and emergency care, which is very much within the focus of the work of the Task and Finish group and of the joint HOSC work programme coming up. And the joint HOSC work programme and its approach was the second main area of discussion which took place outside of the main committee. But the topics that they have identified as the main focus going forward are around the community based services and looking at urgent and emergency care as well. So very much picking up, I think, on what we've just heard in relation to the expansion of the public question and mental health as well. So those are the three main areas that seem to be substantial in their scope and focus, and important across the whole system.
I think it was, I think it was evident that improvements are being made, that there was some, I'm sure, I'll get raised in a minute, there were some bits missing in the presentations which we heard of. There was a lot about looking after staff and getting staff morale up. There wasn't a huge amount about patient care in the presentation, which I think would come out in the wider discussions anyway. But I don't know who's first, Heather, I think, Kate.
Mine's just a quick point. It was really interesting to hear at that presentation that the maternity staffing is full, as in they don't have any vacancies. It's a very low use of agency or bank staff. And as I understand it, that's very unusual for the rest of the hospital, and in fact, probably hospitals across the country as well. And so we were really interested in looking, the support that had been put into that team, particularly given it might not be the most attractive place to work because of all the publicity, you know, rightfully, that has been going on around that maternity unit. So that was of real interest, and that in particular was something we were interested in seeing whether it could be spread to other departments.
Yes, likewise, I was really interested in that, but actually I was really interested in the learning from that and how that was being spread, because it was far from clear. I think I still continue to be very concerned about how patient-centred any of that was, because it was very staff-centred, and that's great, and you have to do that, but actually it still has to be patient-centred as well. And they were very reassuring about that, but that was not there in the presentation at all. The mental health support was interesting, which is what I want to pick up. There's quite a lot of mental health support now being put in for those staff because of the stress they're under. They were far from clear how well the mental health support for the patients, for people who complained, was still going. That was set up earlier. But actually, we know that mental health services across Shropshire are under extreme pressure. And if their response is anything like I've experienced this weekend to a member of my family who was in a mental health crisis, or any one of these families, then quite frankly, it's shocking. It's really shocking. And I want to push forward any look at mental health services, not just for the Uppington report and all of those things, but actually the mental health services across the board, because we are just setting up areas where people are readmitted to police stations, to A&E, to be discharged, just to go in the cycle again. Do we want them going back to A&E? No, we don't. And that could be happening to any one of these situations where people are under significant mental health stress. And at some point, I will share my experiences over the weekend where 2 small children were involved, and I am really shocked, really shocked. I think the National Health Service needs to remember that, quite frankly, all of us use the health services here, and each and every one of us has experiences which are far from good. I will leave it there.
Really?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to pick up on the discussions about maternity services, but in the context of this, the activities of this committee. The Ockenden inquiry was, of course, the principal reason that maternity was suddenly given a large amount of cash and other resources in order to make up for the deficit which had been accrued over the previous decade during the period of austerity. But of course, that's only a single department, and there are large numbers of departments that are short of resources of one sort or another. And picking up on Jill George's question, I wonder whether this committee should routinely ask for specific information that would allow this committee to know that the quality of care was adequate, and that adequate interest and resources were being put into attaining the standards which should be upheld in the NHS. Particularly things like the ambulance response times locally, the numbers of patients who are still in hospital having been deemed medically suitable for discharge. On the 8th of January, there were 150, which is 1 in 5 of the beds in Sath that were occupied by patients under this banner. And currently, at the last one which was published, it was 137. And so clearly some progress has been made, but there's been a huge amount of money that's been made available for Sath and for the integrated care system to allow patients who are fit for discharge to actually be discharged. And the progress just doesn't seem quick enough. In the meantime, by extrapolation, about 5 patients per week are dying unnecessarily in Shropshire because of delays in the emergency services. either of the ambulances going to the patient or the delays when they get to SAF. And this is urgent and it needs to be tackled as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie.
So my question is whether we have sufficient routine information requested by this committee, and I would be very happy to contribute towards that list of information.
Okay, thank you. Item 7, we have Welsh Air Ambulance. So this was brought to the committee by Heather. So Tom, do you want to kick off?
I'll kick off and then I think open the floor to all members, but I know Heather's got a particular interest in relation to this. So as members may be aware, there have been proposals to change where the ambulance or the air ambulance bases are across the border in Wales. So the closest one I think to us is Welshpool Airport, and the proposals are that they would move away from having the helicopter site there or the standoff site there, and potentially our nearest one would be North Wales, up into the North Wales area. They were supposed to be starting formal consultation and then I think the 9th of January. That's been delayed. They are talking about it starting again soon. From my perspective as the officer supporting the committee, the question for me to ask to you all is, do you as a committee want to respond to that as a formal response from this committee to that proposal, or those proposals which are coming forward for consultation, in which case I can support that. And I think really you probably want to or need to hear or benefit from hearing a bit more about some of the issues which are being identified by members who are closest to that area.
Okay. I think yes, we do need to respond to the consultation. But at the moment we don't have a huge amount of information, and maybe we could get a presentation from them at some point about what the proposals exactly are. I'm sure Heather has got plenty to say.
I do, and I've shared all the information that I have with Tom, so Tom's got quite a bit of information around that. I've actually talked to the helicopter crews on base, and they respond to either side of the border. This is not just a Welsh air ambulance, just as our air ambulances respond to them in Mid Wales and across Mid Wales. Their air ambulance comes to us, and actually it has been called for my family with a severe asthma attack in the past because it's the closest and the quickest, especially when, as on this occasion, the Cosford air ambulance was actually out at a road traffic accident. So then the only other one available to the West Midlands, if it hadn't been for that one, was the Gloucestershire one. So actually I've got countless numbers of people who've used the Welsh air ambulance across Shropshire, all along the borders. It goes to Bishop's Castle regularly and also into Clan Division, which is why we're all involved with this. But I think even more to the point is my communities all raise money for the Welsh Air Ambulance, significant money. Priest Weston recently raised £600 because a guy died of a heart attack but actually had used the Welsh Air Ambulance. My parish councils all every year give money to the Welsh Air Ambulance because we use it so often, because it is the closest. They say that if and when they move it to North Wales, and I might say they've already been out to procurement before the consultation started. Procurement has happened on sites across Wales, and they've got a short list of, I don't think Welshpool is part of that from the information I have. But the North Wales site, which is the site where the police have vacated in North Wales, why have they vacated the site in North Wales? Because of weather conditions. And they often say, oh, well, we get flooding at Welshpool. Yes, they do. They deal with it. It might be a weekend they can't use it, but they get the air ambulance out and they use it. They also say, and they said it in public documents, that you can't use it for night flights. They were using it for night flights. Air ambulances go in there at night frequently to refuel. It's a refueling base as well as everything else. This is just about the charity making cuts, trying to make ends meet at the expense of a very, very sparsely populated rural area, both sides of the border. North Wales has good links for terrestrial ambulances. We do not. We all know that. We all know that we have a significant problem. The Welsh terrestrial ambulance has a significant problem across Mid Wales. This is all about numbers yet again. It's all about money and numbers, so we can actually get to more people in the north quicker. What about rural areas? Yet again, what about us? So I really, really want you to take part individually, but also as a committee in this, because our residents have a significant use of a very, very important facility that actually we don't get from either terrestrial ambulance services. Thank you.
Okay, so move on.
So what I will, sorry, I can see another question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I just wondered if Tom had any sort of numbers to, I mean, I'm not disputing for a moment what Heather said. And it's obviously common sense, but I just wondered how many of the emergencies are dealt with by Welsh Air Ambulance as opposed to, you know, Shrewsbury. I mean, somebody must have the numbers.
I haven't got it to hand. I'll have to ask the question and see what we're able to uncover. I suspect that it'll be a small proportion, but nonetheless, they are high impact.
I think the other thing is trying to get the numbers out of the Welsh Air Ambulance has been very difficult. Communication is poor. And actually even for Powys County Council, trying to get the numbers has been very difficult. So we can ask the question we need to, but because we're sparsely populated, when you look at the numbers in comparison with other sites, and that's what they're using across the board, we always come out much poorer than anywhere else, just as we do for any health provision across any of our rural areas.
Okay, so we'll see what we can dig out then for the next meeting.
So we'll ask the questions and see what comes out. If we haven't got access to it, it can't be fair. It may be part of the response.
Okay. Now, item 8 is the carer strategy, so.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. I know most of you now. So I'm Laura Tyler, Assistant Director of Joint Commissioning, and we're today presenting to the committee the draft all-age carers strategy. We've got a bit of a presentation to take you through. Marguerite is our carers lead, who's been leading on this really great piece of work with in co-production with others. We're at draft stage at the moment, so we want to bring it to the committee today so you can have a look at what we've currently got and what's in scope, and also for yourselves to inform anything that you think that we may have missed or we need to extend on. So I'm going to take you through the presentation first, and then we'll have some time then for people to ask questions or comments. Okay, Marguerite.
Hello everybody. So my name is Marguerite Davis. I'm the carers lead. I'm Shropshire Carers Manager. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the all-age carer strategy, the priorities for the new all-age carer strategy are very similar actually to the previous one. But we went out with a small consultation at the end of 2021, and a couple of more priorities were sort of identified from that, which was around coordinated services with health and other bodies, and also transitions. That's not just transition perhaps from children and young people services, that's transitions throughout a carer's role throughout their life. All of the all of the priorities link to some national strategies and also some of the local ones, Shropshire Plan, obviously, but also the health and wellbeing strategy. And as Laura said, you know, we've had a working group that has been working on this, and that's been made up of key organisations and also carers themselves and former carers. Next slide, please. So it's not a statutory requirement to have an all-age care strategy, but it is a good idea to have one so that we know, you know, what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do that. So the action plan is the live document that will be attached to the strategy that we will use to actually make a difference to carers, but we will also have part of that action plan a method of how we are making that difference to make sure we are, so that we know that what we're doing is working. The all-age care strategy and the action plan will be monitored by the Shropshire Carers Partnership Board, which meets quarterly. And again, it is the membership includes statutory bodies, voluntary sector organisations, and carers and former carers as well. Next slide, please. So Shropshire Carers Support, traditionally, Shropshire Council outsourced to an external provider. But when that contract came to an end, we did re-tender, but unfortunately we weren't able to award it to anybody. And so the council decided to bring the service in-house. So from the 1st of February 2021, it became part of Shropshire Council services. And we're coming up to the 2-year mark of having the service. The carer support team is made up of 3.4 full-time equivalent carer support practitioners, a team coordinator, an information officer, and myself as the carer manager. I have to say that within the 2 years that we've been established, we've only actually been fully staffed for 4 months. So there's been sickness and long-term sickness and people changing jobs or retiring. So, but hopefully, we're very hopeful that, you know, come at Easter, we're going to be back to being fully staffed. So the service offers carers so one-to-one support, but we use a coaching sort of method. So we're asking carers, you know, about their needs, what they want to achieve in their life. We're giving them information about their options that are available, but it's up to the carer to make the choice as to what they want to do. And we will then support them to follow that choice. Information and advice and signposting. We do have a support line that at the moment operates Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. I will go into in another slide, but we are hoping to change that so that we cover at least one evening a week and a Saturday, so that there's a bit of scope for people who are working carers or for young adult carers who may want to ring us. Check-in and chats, so that's a minimum of 6 monthly. So this is basically, previously, when it was an external provider and the council would do a carers assessment and would say to carers, come back if there's anything you need. And the same with the external provider. But invariably carers won't come back and they don't realise that they're slipping into crisis until they're right in the middle of it. So what we've established is that we will check in with carers at least every 6 months, but the carer support practitioner might decide it could be 3 months or 4 months, just to check on their well-being, make sure everything's okay, update their emergency plan, and we're hoping that will prevent crises happening. Assistance with planning ahead, and that could be with events, but also individually with carers. Peer support groups throughout the county, so they could be face-to-face, but we're also looking at virtual groups as well. Events and activities, Carers Week, Carers Rights Day, Dementia Week we're getting involved with, all sorts of different things. We established a carer register, and that really is a tool for us to be able to share information quickly to carers. So ideally, we want people to have an email address because obviously then the information is up to date. If we have to post it out, it can be too late by the time they receive it. But we also send text messages as well. And with the carers register, they also get an ID card, an emergency card, so that if something happens to them, they're knocked out, the emergency services or someone will find the card and know that there's someone relying on them at home and will ring the number that's on the card so that emergency help can be put in. And we've just recently, last year, launched the carers feedback mechanism, which was co-produced with a carer. And that is a way for carers to feedback to us about their experiences. So we don't want opinions. It's not a complaints form. We make that very plain. We just want to know about their feedback, as Heather was sort of saying about her feedback, perhaps earlier with her hospital experiences, but good and bad. It's not just about the bad experiences, because we want to share the good practice around. So with that feedback, we collate it, and then we will be going to ship with the information, and hopefully what we want is sort of feedback back as to what difference it's going to make. Next slide, please. So at the time of writing this, we didn't have the census 2021 information. So the data set was only released on the 19th of January, but it is a very basic. So just how many residents in Shropshire identify as a carer. So the plans we have to meet the demand. So digital support for carers. So a new contract was put in place in December 2021. Sorry. For 2 years for digital support for carers. So that was with Mobilise, and Mobilise advises that 60% of the carers that are in contact with them are all new to services. So they're not known by the council previously or by the carer support service. And by working with local strategic partners and carers and the communities to ensure everyone understands their role, because everybody has a role in making sure that carers are identified and that we are able to put support in place and information out there for them. So there's just some basic figures there of carer assessments, the amount of carers. Interestingly, the amount of carers on the carer register was 981 then. It's now over 1,000. It's 1,003. So within 2 weeks, it's sort of increased. We are constantly getting people coming and enrolling on the register. And again, the Mobilise data has increased significantly in 2 weeks as well. So the support is actually, sorry, because the slides have changed slightly, I've got it in the wrong place. So the support section is now 729. So the weeks of doing it has increased, and support from Mobilise is when they are actually having a coaching session with somebody or a virtual cuppa, so it's directly with that person, not something general. Next slide, please. So peer groups in Shropshire, so we have them sort of all around the county. They're generally generic groups, they're not about a specific condition generally. The ones that are in development, in Clevebury, they're developing another one because the carers, the one that exists at the moment is for the carer to bring with their care for person. And they decided they wanted one that was going to be just carers only. And we're also developing 2 virtual clubs. One is a film club, so that a bit like a book club. So they'll watch a film and then discuss it with the carers, and then have a little quiz about the film, and whoever wins the quiz will choose which is the next film that they're going to be watching. And we're also looking at a quiz group. But there's a lot of scope with different types of peer groups that we can develop. So not every carer wants to come to a group where it's entitled carer peer support. So we're looking at things that may be around hobbies or interests. It could be a photography group, it could be a singing group, you know, it could be an environmental friendly group. So whatever people have got an interest in, but it will be carers who join it. And there's always going to be scope within that group to give them information and also to provide support to them. And then there's some more exploratory ones going on. Next slide, please. Carers assessments and social care support. So a carer assessment is about the carer. It's about not how well they're caring, but it's about what their caring role, what effect that is having on them, on their life, on their health. So a lot of the benefits from the carers assessment is not something that you can actually see or measure. So in sort of like, it's not monetary necessarily. And a lot of those benefits, the emotional support and reassurance, you know, very often carers can't talk to their friends or their family truly about how they feel because they feel they may be judged. And so this is an opportunity to talk to somebody about how they really feel and be reassured that that is normal. You know, they're not a horrible person. Perspective and awareness. Again, sometimes you can be too close to a situation to see what the options may be. Support with difficult conversations. So very often carers won't ask friends and family for help, and that can be for a variety of reasons. So it can be support to have those, those conversations. The focus is on the carer. Very often people will ask a carer about the person they're caring for. They don't ask about the carer themselves, what they want from life. Information and advice. Practical solutions, so assistive technology. There is a lot of assistive technology that can benefit carers that is not necessarily really high tech. If you look at a lot of the mainstream ones that are being advertised on TV now, like Alexa, you know, that has been geared towards the care sort of sector, really, with the adverts. And there's also very simple things like a special plug. So if someone kept the tap on, it would flood the building because it would allow water to go through. And obviously there are direct payments as well that can be applied for. And that can be for a whole range of different things. It could be a laptop, which is what the statutory guidance recommends, or a shed, or gym membership. Next slide, please. Respite care. So this is often provided by a replacement care giver. So it gives the carer a short-term break. Under the Care Act, it should come under the cared for person's support plan and personal budget, and it should be considered during the needs assessment of the cared for person. And also, if you're going to put any replacement care in, the cared for person has to agree to it because obviously it's affecting them. You know, they may not be happy with that, so we need to check with that. But there are other ways that respite care can be provided. Day centres, daycare support, joint activities, getting friends and family to help, which is where the conversations bit in the carers assessment could help. And there's holidays, the RAF Veterans Association, you know, they do a lot of veteran breaks where their hotels are geared up to provide care. And they support the carer as well as the cared for person. Next slide, please. Mobilise Online. So as I said, we started a contract with them in December 2021. We had done some pilots during lockdown. And I think because of lockdown, people were more willing to try to do things online. And we found that this was actually beneficial to have an extra string, if you like, to our carer support. So working with them and the more traditional carer services, we're hoping to reach and deliver more support to more carers. So we were recognised at the National HSJ Awards in 2022 for our work with Mobilise. So Mobilise offer very low preventative early support using technology to identify carers. And so they can identify hidden carers, the ones that we don't know about, that we haven't come across yet. And the idea is that the earlier that we can actually identify carers, the more support we can put in place to prevent their role deteriorating. So our offer includes online network of people caring for others. As I said, an individual support with a carers coach. So that could be face-to-face, online, face-to-face, or it could be sort of over the phone, whatever's best really for the carer. Live discussion groups. There's lots of online tools that are really helpful. So, for example, if people are thinking about getting carers allowance, there's a tool that they can use to see whether or not that would be appropriate for them before they actually apply for it. Next slide, please. So young carers, young adult carers and parent carers. The young carers are currently supported by an external provider, and this service is actually at the moment in the process of being reviewed. So we work closely with the provider, Crossroads Together, and they have informed us that because it's quite a wide age range that they're supporting, that once the young carers get to about 15, 16, they sort of drop off from their service slightly. So because we're trying to put in a transition pathway for young adult carers and parent carers to adult services, we want them just to maintain a contact, at least with those young carers, so that they can introduce them to us when they get a little bit older. And I think it's on another slide that what I was going to say. So next slide, please. So future development plans, extending the working hours, as I said earlier, future planning workshops, as I said, generic ones, but also for specific conditions as well, because doing a future planning workshop for adults with a learning disability can be very different to doing one for carers of people living with dementia. A training programme, we'd like to have a calendar of training so that carers and staff can book in to the next available one. And that could be training around first aid, or it could be self-advocacy, or it could be assertiveness training, could be anything really. Young adult carers basic skills course. So that would be things like basic cooking, CV writing, apprenticeship. There could be anything really that is going to equip them really for adulthood. And what we're hoping is that as we come onto the young adult carers basic life skills course, that is the transition then into adult services, and we can pick them up then and support them. And interestingly, Mobilise, with the information that they gave us, what the young adult carers were reporting to them was not that they needed so much information about their caring role. It was about when they go into the workplace, how do they interact with their colleagues? How do they tell their colleagues about their caring role? It was that kind of thing that they really need support with. Parent care information and support being aligned to what we are providing in adult services. Information booklets. So these are top tips really from carers who are have already gone through the caring role, about what to look out for, things that professionals don't often remember to say to people. So, for example, people living with dementia won't see mashed potato on a white plate necessarily. So those sorts of basic things. We want to develop an activity library so that we've got a range of activities that peer groups can just pick one off the shelf and they know who to contact, how to set it up, everything's in place. A buddying programme for peer support, and we're in the process of actually piloting a carers hospital discharge checklist. So that's hopefully going to give carers peace of mind, because they've got a checklist they can just tick, yes, I've got all this information, I know where to go if I haven't got it. Next slide, please. The carers feedback mechanism that we launched last year, I think initially people thought it was just a one-off thing, and so we got quite a lot of people at the beginning sort of contributed to it, and they haven't realised that it's something that's there for them to add to, permanently. So it's slowed down really the information we're getting. So it's about publicising it more. But we've been placing it into main themes, and those themes have been integrated systems, so that's communication between all the systems, staff knowledge and behaviours, availability of services, and funding. So those have been the ones that most commonly come up. Next slide, please. The timeline for the strategy. As I said, we're here today, and then we will be doing consultation and completing, finalising the draft, ready for cabinet, and then implementation. That's one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's so open for questions now.
Okay, thank you. A lot of information there, and I think firstly, congratulate the team for the for the work which is ongoing, and what's a comprehensive strategy, and covers things well. If I may, I'll jump in before Heather. There was a lot of the carer support. There was a list of meetings there in Oswestry and various places which are around the main centres, and I'm sure Heather's going to say, what about the rural areas? But what I'm guessing is that your funding only goes so far, and your online virtual couples and everything, that support mechanism is already in place, and it's it's reaching further than the main centres of population.
Yes, we are always trying to develop more, but it is, as you say, funding only goes so far, and capacity of the team, the amount of actual workers within the team, only allows sort of so much. But what we do try and do is, when we're setting up peer groups, we're trying to work with communities. So the one in Pontesbury, for example, it's also the parish clerk is involved with that, and other organisations, so that we can share the responsibility. And that means that we can actually do more, because we can then have the capacity to do more in other places as well. So we are looking to expand to wherever there is a need. And certainly if anybody feels that there is a need in their areas and that people want to attend. And it's knowing, I think, also the best venue, not the venue exactly, but the place to actually have it. Yeah. So and you're probably better placed in your areas to know where is the more central place for all of those outlying sort of villages to attend, so that we're putting the peer group, the face-to-face peer group, in the right place. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It was me.
Go on, Ed.
I think this is a wonderful strategy. I think you're doing an immense amount of work there. I think yet again 200 square miles of sparsely populated people have been shelved, quite frankly. We have poor digital access, we have poor mobile phone signal, and there's nothing apart from Pontesbury, which is up the A488, that actually even impinges on us. Bishop's Castle Town Council is very active. There are all sorts of local groups. Nobody has contacted any of us about that, and Ruth would be really, really keen to get involved in all of that work. I come to these meetings, I'm beginning to wonder why I come, because nobody ever thinks about the rural areas. 2 carers in a car never came into our areas. none of these things actually deals with the very large elderly population we have in the south and the number of carers who are actually cut off. I still have people. Are you working with the likes of Chris Taylor and Ben Walker to actually improve the connections? Because the connections are so bad, they can't Google half of this stuff, even if they have the ability or the time. And if you're a carer looking after someone with dementia at home, which there are quite a lot of, how are you going to spend the time or get someone to look after someone while you go to a meeting? It's, if you could deliver that across the rural areas as well as all the bigger towns, then I would be really grateful, because actually, yet again, we're second class citizens. And we see the Fuller report, which quite frankly talks about all of these things with the ICS, and this actually should all link in with the ICS, because it's about a joint strategy across the whole ward. I'm not denigrating the work you've done, because the work you've done is fantastic. What I'm saying is we can't just continue year after year, as we have done since 2009 and the unitary occurred, to actually blot out large areas of the county, because it's difficult. And it is difficult, but you haven't worked with us. And I have this with the health service at the moment. No, Bishop's Castle Hospital. No, we're going to have a consultation event. Yeah, 1st of March. What have they done? They've told the hospital staff they're never going back there. They've taken the equipment out. We know that contracts have been given to people to come in from abroad where they're only allowed to work at Ludlow. Never tried to get people in. So we've got yet another arm of all of this, that it could be a support, a joint working hub in that area for carers, for the whole system, where we have very poor access to anything. If you're a carer in our area and you can't access a lot of the digital stuff, the public transport is shocking. So yet again, I want to know what we're going to do for those very remote carers who are living in isolated conditions, and how that's going to be rolled out, so that actually we can all take part. And working with local elected members in these difficult areas is a way forward. It's a really important way forward, and we care passionately about it. Comments, please.
Laura, do you have-
Very well said. Very well said.
Just to come back on that, I think absolutely, and I think we need to do a priority session, don't we, with our members, and look at how we can go out to you're absolutely right in terms of the remote. And that's, I think the team, bearing in mind it is a small team, are doing an incredible job. But it needs to be, they do telephone conversations. I know we focus a bit on the digital, but that is again one option. But there is more that we can do. I absolutely accept that, councillor. So I think one of the takeouts that we'll do today is we will do a separate session with our parish members and look at what we can do and how we can do a bit more outreach and what some of the actions out of that. Because as Margarita has said, she's really keen, to build on groups that are already, maybe in the areas and knowledge and local knowledge. So that's something that we'll take out. And if it's not, as part of this is the action plan. So I think as part of the action plan, you're absolutely right. We'll make sure that we are really focusing on those rural areas. And so we've got specific things. So I'd welcome your comments on that once we draft that.
I have no idea that actually there was a dementia support group in Bishop's Castle. So there's a whole communication thing about that. Do you know how I found out? I actually went to a meeting in Enterprise House and saw it. It's no good, We have to actually be better at telling people what there is that's there.
I don't know if Nick will go with you.
Just going back a stage, Chair, just looking at the bits on demographics, and maybe I've misunderstood it, but as far as I can see, the census results show in round figures something like 30,000 unpaid carers in Shropshire. I wasn't aware of the existence of Mobilise, and Mobilise obviously do a great job, but they're not even in contact with half of that 30,000. I mean, their numbers are 13,000, 13,500, something like that. So there's a great wodge of people out there that we don't even know about, except that they put something on their census return. And because we don't know about them, I mean, some of them may be coping absolutely fine. I accept that. And, you know, I come across people, you know, I'm particularly interested in children who need care and their parents. And, you know, I come across people who have no idea that any sort of support is available. You know, they just get on with it as best they can. Clearly it's stressful, but you know, if they don't know that there is anybody they can contact, so I suppose my question is, what are you doing about in some way communicating with that half of the 30,000 that you have no contact with at all? And as Heather says, what you're doing is fabulous, but it's not even you know, it's touching the surface. That's all, because there's this great wodge of people who you know nothing about at all.
Can I supplement that? Because I was asking a similar question: is awareness. I mean, do GPs advise people? How do people get to know? Do parish councils know? Because they're the ones, in fact, will decimate it and send them information around. I mean, my children had turned around to me and said, "You're a carer," because my wife is pretty immobile. I do things for her, but I don't consider myself a carer, being honest at the moment, you know. But there's a lot of people like me, in addition to the ones that we've already mentioned, this 30,000. And I'm afraid it doesn't get across. Communication is so poor. Nobody knows I don't know anything. I don't know. And I know quite a bit about my own village in Alvey, but I don't know whether there's any groups apart from the patients, you know, for the health service. That's the only thing. I don't know anything else about the parish council. That's all. So what's going on? I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that is actually part of priority 1, which is about identifying carers and carers themselves. You just said yourself, you don't class yourself as a carer, you know. So it's about helping carers themselves identify as a carer. And very much our actions within priority 1. You know, this is what I'm saying about it has to be all of health and social care. It can't just be social care, because we don't get to see people until usually it's a bit further down the line, you know, and we need to be working with health, with GP practices, actually with parish councils. We've been working with Highly parish councils, different things, but we do need to be working more with them.
And the hospitals, because they pick them up.
Yeah, exactly, which is the hospital checklist. That's one of the reasons why we've done that. So that we're going into the hospital. We did have somebody in the hospital providing carer support who was raising awareness with hospital staff as well. And that's the important bit. It's raising the awareness with hospital staff and GP surgeries so that they identify people and they can pass the information on to that person or refer them to us so that we can help that person. But we can't do it without the whole of the health and social care sector being involved.
Precisely. Kate Dunburley.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. And I do wonder whether it would be worth having a briefing session that could be heard both by parish councils, but also by Shropshire council councillors.
Just noted that down.
Yeah.
That action, yes.
Because I think it would be good to get this out further, you know, echoing my colleagues' comments. I've got a couple of questions and also just a comment on the strategy itself. My first question, I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but I noticed that we anticipated the number of people declaring themselves to be carers as going up. with the census data, but in fact, it's
It's
reduced by
really
about
from
10%.
Yeah,
So that was in 2011, there was around 33,000, and now we've got 30,000. So I guess just any thought that I can't believe it's true.
The Office of National Statistics have cautioned us about comparing 2011 and 2021 because the question's been phrased differently in 2021, and also the options that people have been able to take is different to those in 2011. Also, they wonder whether or not, because it was in the middle of COVID, whether that changed things slightly. And they also use something called age standardised procedures to alter the figures. It alters the figures slightly to make it easier to compare over time. So the reason they do that is, so for example, we know that older people are more likely to have poorer health. And we also know that in England and Wales, the elderly population has been increasing. So if that number has increased, has it increased because we've got more people, or has it increased because people have got poorer health? So that's why they do this age standardised procedure. So I need to ask further, because it only came out sort of last week, so I need to ask further what the exact figure was before the age standardised procedure. Really
it'd be good to have that, because our population is growing and our population is aging, so it'd be amazing.
But that's the reason they've given as to why there's a difference.
Okay, thank you. My next question is around, obviously this is care is hugely important for everything, our economy, our well-being, absolutely everything, play a vital role. And my next question is, I've actually had good feedback about your team. So I've had good feedback from residents since it's come in-house. So I just wanted to let you know that's obviously a small sample, but that's what I've heard. But I was just interested to know, you've got 3.4
full-time equivalent.
Yeah. What did the previous team have? I mean, has that gone up or down by bringing it in?
The external provider, they 2P'd over actually, the staff that were with the external provider. And when they 2P'd over, only 3 members of staff, but they were 1.5 full-time equivalent because they're all part-time, 2P'd over. And I think they were the only ones who are actually within the team of the external provider.
So you've increased the staffing in your team as a result of...
I think they had people leaving and they hadn't been able to replace them. So they did have more originally, but it sort of had dwindled to that.
Okay. Thanks. And then my final point is really just a comment about the strategy itself. I really welcome co-production. You can see that within the plan, and it's just, my one comment is the thing that seems to have slipped from the previous strategy is the emphasis on encouraging people back into employment and work. I mean, it is a little bit in there, but I just wonder, like, for example, it didn't come up in how it supports the Shropshire plan economy, for example. I just wonder whether you just want to take a look and see, because that's in the nice guidance, obviously, and it's a really important part of. I know a lot of carers won't be able to work because of their situation, but hopefully some will be able to either return to work or continue working.
That's a really good comment. Thank you, Councillor. Because again, I think Margarita, you said earlier on about, the comments coming back is particularly from younger carers was about, how do I have that conversation with my employers, about my caring role and my caring responsibilities. So I think it's really important. I think we probably need to maybe emphasise that a bit more, and especially as we've got an enabled service here, we've got training, arm as part of the, so there's real good, links across, isn't there? Margarita, you work with them as well, don't we? So I think we need to expand on that. So it's a really good point. Thank you.
And the future planning element as well sort of incorporates that, because the future planning could be they want to retrain, or perhaps we can help them into volunteering that will help them to start to build towards. So all of that as well will contribute to it.
Tony, do you want to go on that?
Yeah, just to summarise, so huge thank you to Marguerite and to all of our carers who have worked together to develop this strategy. The action plan will be the key document, and I think committee, you might want to consider how you put that into your work plan, because the action plan will make the live document about what is the difference that we're actually making. You will note this is very much a Shropshire Council strategy. I would like, with committee's agreement, and Marguerite knows I'm about to say, is to talk to my ICS colleagues about adopting this strategy, because there's really key commitments and priorities set there. That's not just about Shropshire Council's commitments and priorities, it's about the ICS all wanting to develop, involve and empower our carers, and to ensure that we're all identifying, supporting and enabling carers to live a healthy life, because not all of the carers want to make contact with Shropshire Council. It might be by the dentist or the optician having a conversation. And so I would really like us to take this forward to the ICS and develop an all-age strategy for the ICS. It's not just for the Shropshire Council. So that's something that I've agreed to take forward. But great strategy. Take on board the valuable comments about the rurality, and the employment bit we'll absolutely add in before we take that to Cabinet. Thank you.
Bernie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the presentation on the strategy. It looks excellent, but of course the difficulty frequently is in implementation. The Association of Care Providers have published data showing that there are 540,000 people waiting for a care assessment or waiting for their care package in England, and Shropshire is about 1% of that. So do you have any data on how many people are waiting for these assessments or for their care packages, bearing in mind that that proportionally it would, the 540,000 would be equivalent to about 5,000 in Shropshire, and I think you did something like 452 over the 9-month period in 2022. So what is the waiting list? The second is in relation to how you are going to be able to achieve your strategy against the background of £1 million cut in review of supported living model, £500,000 cut in efficiencies, £346,000 cut in support contracts. And the third question is, why are there still, in January 2023, 137 patients in Shrewsbury Hospital who have been designated as fit to be discharged in hospital, but still in hospital, stopping other activity taking place and causing a log jam of people coming into the service? What is it that these people need to get back out into the community that's not there now?
So the first point that you wanted was about the carers assessments waiting times. So the waiting times actually differ in each area. So we as a team don't actually do carers assessments. The carers assessments are done by the community teams within the council, the community social work teams. But on average, I would sort of say that it's about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. It would depend, because they very often they're done at the Let's Talk local hubs that are going on. So it would depend on when that suits the carer, whether the next date of that hub suits that carer, or they'd have to wait till the next one.
Can we have that data
I can get that data, yeah.
on a regular basis? And the other two questions?
Do you want me to answer those, Margaret?
Yeah, I won't be able to.
That's right. So just in relation to the action plan in terms of what, the next steps. Yes, we know we've got a significant saving agenda to do, but I think Margarita has made the point when it is everybody's roles and responsibilities in relation to delivering support to carers across the county. So we are thinking and looking at all sorts of different ways. You heard some examples, some great things around resources, around the community support. We link really closely in with Rachel's team in terms of social prescribing and to make sure that we cascade information out. So there's a lot that we can do that doesn't actually cost us to do, but it's about that communication and making sure that people are clear about what is available, where it's available, and where it's not available. Let's look at how we can utilise some of the local assets and groups and build upon that. So I think, you know, that's what we're trying to do as part of the role and to, you know, as part of the strategy delivery. So thinking creatively and thinking outside the box, but there's some really great examples already in place. It's just about building on those. And just in relation to your third point around the people who are medically fit and ready to discharge, clearly out of that, we don't know what portion of those would be carers. But as Margarita was saying, you know, we're looking at that link and looking at the checklist and looking at how we can support people, you know, around the discharge process. I think there's more we probably can do around that, and we should be doing, and it can be part of the work that we need to move forward with.
Thank you, but of course, what we need is outcome. I mean, we all know of strategies that have talked about and implemented, but still we don't seem to have any realistic reduction in the number of people who are medically able to go home and who are still in hospital. That number hasn't really changed in over a year.
I think we're talking a very different subject to what we're talking
Yes,
about right now. I
different
understand your
people
point,
burning.
councillor, but you know this whilst it, I know, you know, that as I said, the carers may form a portion of those. We don't know, but actually that's a separate question here. But as I said, we are looking at putting in carer support into the hospital to support that process. Thank you.
We can get your people to direct that question to you, I'm sure.
Can I?
Heather, just quick.
It is. It's just a couple of things that I forgot to ask
Yeah.
before about the strategy. It would be really useful because you gave us the numbers of people who would suddenly come online, new carers, this, that, and the other. It'd be really useful if I had if we all had a geographic spread for those, so that we can see the areas we're actually picking those new carers up from and the existing ones. I will ask the next bit when it comes to the work programme, because I did ask the budget to come back to us to look at how you're going to make those savings.
Okay.
I did it at the last meeting, I think. So there we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I thank you both for your time and answering the questions, especially for someone obviously beyond your remit, but it is what it is. So thank you for your time and well done on the strategy, and hope all goes well. I'm sure you'll be taking the comments back.
Thank you. Just thank the committee actually for your really valued input. There's some really good comments there, and hopefully we'll strengthen and enhance our strategy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 9, which is update on the Shrewsbury Health and Wellbeing Hub. And we've got Gareth, Jackie, and Emma going to the back of the room. So we'll have a personnel change at the table. Come down, as they say. Great, welcome to the hot seat, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. I think we've got a slide deck that's been previously shared. Will we be able to bring it onto the screen?
Who would it have come from?
Me, Emma Pyra.
It's actually on the.
It's not
It's on the
agenda.
Yeah, it's actually on the pack.
I will, if people are okay referring to it on their own laptops,
It
then.
would be quite useful.
Okay.
If they're looking for it, that's where it is.
Thank you. Should we just do introductions while we're digging around? Sure, most are familiar. I'm Gareth Robinson. I'm the Director of Delivery and Transformation for NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin.
Hello, I'm Jackie Robinson. I'm the Associate Director of Communications and Engagement for the ICS.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma Pyra. I'm the Associate Director of Primary Care and the Project Lead for the Shrewsbury Hub.
Okay, and then I'll fill a little bit more. We're looking to cover two main areas today. One is an update on progress to date.
Do you mind speaking into the mic?
Of course, sorry. Do I need to press anything?
Right.
Bottom right. That's right. Does that work better? Great, thank you. Apologies. So just while we're waiting for the slides to come up, we are looking to cover two areas this morning. The first section will be an update on the options appraisal process. Here we go. And then Jackie will cover the engagement communications process going forwards. So colleagues will recall we attended a previous oversight and scrutiny committee, gave an update on progress to where we got to at that point, which was concluding the options or the scenarios for taking forward the Shrewsbury hub, which concluded the consolidation, the relocation of 6 GP practices into one location. And we took away a number of actions and commitments in terms of the future stakeholder engagement. And subsequent to that, have carried out a number of stakeholder events, which is taking us to where we are now, which I'll give you an update on where we are with the site options appraisal process. And then I'll hand over to Jackie in terms of the engagement and comp side. So if I could just scroll down into a very nice green slide. Just as a quick recap, stage one was the completion of the case for change, which concluded that the only viable way forward in terms of the future of the 6 practices was the co-location into one centre. As part of that, we also defined the essential criteria to assess future options against, and I'll come on to the detail of that. Stage 3 was then identifying the long list of options, geographical site location options, for the potential site. And colleagues will recall, even as far back as I think the event in St Chad's, we were seeking ideas and options from local public and citizens in terms of those potential locations. Pleased to say we identified 47 possible options, including Emma's back garden, which were, in all seriousness, a viable option for us to go forward to a short list. And that long list of options that really only had 3 criteria. So if I could just ask you to move on one slide. 3 criteria which we assessed against. Does the site meet the minimum area requirement for the build? Will the land be available in the project timescales? And are there any significant site constraints that can be identified? So our planner worked through systematically all 47 against those criteria, and they're simple yes/no answers. For all of those sites that were available that were able to meet those 3 criteria, that created a shortlist for us to now take forward into detailed planning or options appraisal. If I could then go on to the next. Oh, sorry, there was one step as well on top of that, was a GP practice validation of the sites. That was important for us to be able to be clear that the sites that were coming forwards, our GP practices were actually committed to. There was no point in identifying a site that GP practices said we're not interested in. And that was an important assessment based on the GP view, but also GP representing their own patient views as well. In terms of the identification then through to a short list, and we've ended up with 10 locations, which I'll come on to on the map, or the spread on the map shortly. These have a broader range of criteria, and these are very technical assessments. So these are covering off whether the site should be available to acquire, so it's either a public sector asset or is on the open market or sale by private treaty. That we have the ability to achieve planning permission to deliver the health hub on the site. That the site should have a clean title, i.e. it's free from any insurmountable covenants, or there is only a low amount of general covenants. And then finally, that the site should have access to statutory utilities and adopted highways. This criteria will then be used to assess which of the 10 shortlisted options become viable for us to continue forward with. I think if we go on to the next slide, there's additional criteria on here, so I was jumping ahead of myself. Site location, I will read through these because it's important first of all understand the level of detail of the planning. The site location should be in close proximity to serve the patients of the practices. I think given the conversations and the discussions we've had to date, the importance of the site should be easily accessible by sustainable travel methods, foot, cycle, car, public transport. It should be located within or near to an area of deprivation within Shrewsbury. It should allow for expansion and that the site, oh, bless you, and that the site is flexible in terms of the building plan, which will impact upon the footprint subject to planning constraints. Okay. So those are the criteria that will be assessed against. And just actually, if we go on to the next slide, I'll come back to this one in a second. As a man with a degree in geography, I do love a map. This is, you'll recognise Shrewsbury at the top with the river loop, and then the area focused on south of Shrewsbury that we are looking to influence for potential site options. The yellow dots, you can see, I haven't got my glasses on, but I think top right is Belvedere, and bottom left, actually just off the map, is the beaches in Baston Hill. And then the other 4 dots in between are Marden, Marysville, South Hermitage, and we're actually missing one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Claremont Bank in the centre, of course. Thank you. The area that is ringed in red with the slight red transparent colour, all of the 10 sites are located within that area. At this point, due to issues of commercial confidentiality, we're not able to share all of the 10 sites, and we will work through those to the point that we can get the viable options going forward. But you will see that the footprint of all of the available options sit comfortably within the south of Shrewsbury area. Belvedere and Claremont Bank both sit slightly outside. There is always that dynamic for Claremont Bank in particular, which is the South Shrewsbury nominal hub that sits in the centre of how they would play into a South of Shrewsbury location. And then Belvedere, both GP practices, Belvedere and Claremont, have been very closely involved in the acceptability of these, of the remaining 10. And while sitting slightly outside of the footprint, are comfortable with the options we've got available. We go back up one slide. This is just a reminder, it's a slide that you've seen before of the area that public and patients have influenced and will influence going forward. So the public and patients influenced the long list of potential options and actually provided a live number of the 47. They influenced the criteria for site options appraisal. So the stakeholder reference group, I think which some of you are part of, helped develop that criteria. And they will help influence the future service model located with the hub. They influence the long list, as I've just described, and the future service model configuration of services co-locating with the 6 practices. So one of the areas that Jackie will move on to is that this isn't just about GP practices, it's about the local services that will wrap around that. And our stakeholder reference group will have a significant influence in shaping that. But there are decisions that local public and patients can't influence, and that's because of you'll recognise some of the criteria that some of the issues are binary. If, for example, a site doesn't have a viable access to site utilities, then unfortunately that's not a decision that public and citizens will be able to make. That is a binary decision. And you can see that across the 8 or 9 criteria, that those will be factors that are just a matter of fact as to whether we can take locations forward or not. And then ultimately the preferred site location will be carried out on an assessment of a business case. And again, that won't necessarily be a decision that the public can have a choice on. That will be based on a number of technical criteria that allow us to assess which is the most viable option to go forward. I think a couple of final slides. This is just in there, as we're developing the project, we get a number of architect contributions to our work. That's an artist's impression of a similar project. I'm not actually sure which one this is. Do we know if this is red?
I can't remember which one it is. I think ours would be slightly bigger than that one.
Slightly bigger than that one. Just to give you a sense of where it's going. And then the final and possibly most important aspect, given the previous conversations, is the travel impact assessment. Ordinarily, we would have a travel impact assessment on the site that goes to consultation. But given the importance of the travel impact assessment to the process, we've determined that we will carry out a full travel impact assessment on all 10 sites as it currently stands. That will give us the opportunity to assess every part, given the importance that the travel and access has been to the local council and to all the citizens. That impact assessment is being carried out by an external specialist company. It's been, I think, taken off the Shropshire Council's framework, so it's a company that you're familiar with, and that work will take 6 weeks to complete. That's starting slightly later. So again, back to the principle of making sure that we are engaging and consulting with citizens and patients appropriately. What that means is that we're going to have a slightly longer duration in terms of completing that travel impact assessment that we planned, which means one of the things I need to brief you on is that the consultation process is now going to be pushed back a little further again, not because we're trying to push anything back into the long grass, but we just want to make sure it's done properly. And I hope you recognise that we're doing that for the best of intentions. We would expect off the back of that travel impact assessment and overall integrated impact assessment, the appraisal report to be available in March, and we'll go to the project board. And subject to timelines being hit, and again, I come back to it's important to do it properly rather than quickly. So we're not being held to rigid timelines here in the way that sometimes NHS projects are. Ideally, we would have this available to project board in March and then to Oversight and Scrutiny Committee on the 27th of March. There will be various aspects of that we probably would require it to be a closed meeting. Again, in principle of doing it properly rather than quickly, if we find there are barriers or if there's something that comes out of the travel impact assessment that causes us further questions, those timelines may slip. But given we are looking towards the 25-26 build, then again, for the sake of a few weeks or a month or two here or there, we'd rather get it right. And I think, if I remember my slide deck right, that's it in terms of the site options appraisal.
Can I ask just a question about that? Because there's more to come.
There is, yes. I think now would be a good time to pause for questions on the.
So if it's a closed session when it comes to us, this is so important to the public. Surely we should be able to do some of it in public, so that actually as little as possible is kept from the public. I can understand the commercial sensitivity and all of that would have to be done in a closed session.
Yeah.
But I would hate for this scrutiny committee to be party to something that looked like a secret process. And I really don't think it would do your consultation any good for that to happen. So I would hope that we can find a way through so that we can do some in public, but the commercial stuff in private.
I think that's absolutely right, Councillor Kidd. I think for me, it's signalling the fact that we may need to, until we understand which of the viable options to go forwards. We don't know the issues of confidentiality. So what I'd suggest is we work through that process, get to the outcome, and then make the most appropriate decision at that point. But we are keen, as you'll have heard us say over and over again, to do this as transparently as we possibly can.
Yeah, okay. Bernie, I think your hand up was first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gareth. Understanding that there are some areas that are commercially sensitive, as Heather has said, is there a reason why the 10 options that are going to be looked at is itself sensitive? Because surely the commercial sensitivity only extends to when you start looking at providers and purchasing. So the actual identity of the 10 sites, could that not be made public? And if not, can it be made confidentially to councillors so that we at least can influence to some extent what goes forward, because there may be some factors that you may not be aware of. There may be new sites, and for example, the West Midlands Ambulance Services has recently confirmed that they will be moving from the site in Mercian Close in Meal. So I'm not saying that should be an option, but that there may be some new options that are now available, because when we last looked at it, it was about 6 months ago.
So in terms of the other potential sites, I'll take that question, I'll come back to confidentiality in a second. So the 47, we went as broad as we possibly could, and it's basically any site that was big enough to accept that would be available, would be big enough to accept the hub that would be available, were considered. So I think the ability to move and look at new sites is probably unnecessary at this point. And I think that has been thoroughly investigated. In terms of confidentiality, I think I'll need to take some advice in terms, unless Jackie can dig me out of a hole, I think I'll need to take some advice in terms of what we can and can't share. The guidance I've been given really clearly is at this moment it's matters of commercial confidentiality we can't share with the committee, but I can go away and look into the actual reasons and provide that separately too.
Thank you. Can I ask, we've already covered this in questions before, but there hasn't really been a response to it. Is it going to be possible to have a residual footprint in some of these areas that won't have a local service? In your engagement exercise, you identified that 4 in 10 people walk to their surgery currently, and that clearly won't happen when there's a single hub. While there was the need to get lots of people vaccinated, you had a vaccination bus that went round the various areas to try to catch people. Is it not possible? Is it not possible to have a similar sort of thing for the areas that are not going to have a local service? So a form of transport that could go on various days around the areas to be able to provide a local service for those who find it difficult to walk. And indeed, you can put some telemedicine units in there as well. So it would have a lot of scope if that was possible, and would go some way towards having a residual footprint in those areas. The final thing is to ask, have you got an up-to-date list of the services that you were proposing to?
The next bit, isn't it?
Yeah, you're going to go to that, right? Well, I'll delay that question. Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, on the residual services, Jackie will guide us through.
Residual footprint.
So I'll come back to residual. So on the services, Jackie will guide us through an element of that shortly. On the residual services, I wonder if we're talking across purposes, because there's a simple yes to that. As we develop the hub, better understand where it is, if we determine that residual service is required, then we will investigate and look at setting that up. I certainly know one of the practices would intend on, one of the dual site practices at the moment would intend on maintaining one of those going forwards. But a lot of that will be dependent on which site we determine. So if I could just go back to the map, sorry, forgive me. If we ended up with a site close to, say, Marden MP, then the chances are Belvedere practice probably wouldn't need any residual services. But if we ended up with something down by the beaches, then they might. Those are questions that need to be considered as we get to the site location. But I do know one of the practices is really keen, where it already has a satellite service, that they would continue to provide that. So those kind of options are available to us.
Do you know how many car parking spaces that you will allow for?
We're not at that point yet, but what would happen is the travel, as the building is designed, and the patient population, well, we know that the population would be using the hub now. There's an assessment of how many parking spaces that would require. We'd need to build that into the planning, but that will be part of the makeup of any NHS building. You work through the public transport arrangements, the car parking requirements, and all the other requirements.
And bearing in mind that often these estimates are short of what's required, can we possibly know at an earlier stage what those estimates would be? I mean, for example, some those who are experienced in this area have suggested that 2,000 car parking spaces may be needed for a building a building with the services that this one will provide.
I don't think we've got to the point of understanding the car parking spaces required yet, but that will be part of the planning process.
Just introducing a number.
I think you've had the answer. I think you've had the answer to that one.
Thank you.
Nick.
I wonder if Gareth could talk a little bit more about the travel impact assessment. Is there any reason why the criteria shouldn't be made public? Because obviously, what criteria are used will have a huge influence on. Sorry. My question is about the travel impact assessment, and I'm wondering if we could be told more about the criteria, which I think have already been established from wording here, as to what those criteria are, because that will influence the outcome of the impact assessment.
Jackie?
Yeah, there's kind of hidden agenda around that. Of course, we can share that. We've only recently really secured the provider for the travel impact assessment, and we're waiting for another meeting to come forward. But there'd be no question, we'd be more than happy to share that, and we'd put it onto the website, for the hub. I think the other thing to note though is once you come through the travel impact assessment way, and if you go to consultation, you have to share anyway how those areas were arrived at and what the process was. So showing the criteria at this stage is absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, to take a sort of silly example, if there's an assumption that X% of people are going to be on bikes, that will influence the outcome of the travel impact assessment, and obviously one might wish to question. I remember when we were discussing the facilities in Whitchurch, there was an assumption that everybody would be walking to the new medical centre. Well, plainly that wasn't right. So thank you, that's reassuring.
Okay, Gerald was next, and then Kate.
If this becomes successful, and I'm sure it will, is there any plans to build in some extra expansion in the near future? But if it's going to be successful, a lot of people in Shrewsbury maybe will want to change their surgery to this one. Will that be allowed?
So it's sorry.
Just how much can will it expand? How many people actually will it be allowed?
So the first part of the question is can it expand? So it's being designed with expansion space available, and that's consistent with most NHS builds, is to be able to future-proof decisions. But this will be a significant investment in its own right, and we wouldn't expect any expansion to happen in short order. The question about about patients choosing to access it from other practices, I think it's a really interesting one. And the honest answer is we don't know. So the hub will be located in the south of Shrewsbury, and all bar two of the practices in that primary care network will be a part of it. So there won't be a geographical incentive for patients to want to move to the hub, because that hub will be at the heart of the six. And there may be a request for some movement, but we all understand how difficult it is for patients to move between practices at the moment. So we don't anticipate a significant amount of movement, and we'll need to think through what that might mean in the future. But because it is taking in 6 of the 8 practices, most of the practices that you would expect to have patients going into there will already be in there.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I welcome a delay in order to kind of push through the plans properly. I just wonder whether, there has been some developments in Plymouth where one of our 6 partner sites actually got to the stage of putting spades into the ground and demolishing.
Yeah.
And they have had their money withdrawn, from the Tabell project. And I'm just wondering, is the money still available for this hub?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting parallel, Councillor Halliday. So the Plymouth hub was at a slightly further level of development than the Shrewsbury hub, and they chose to put it into the 24-25 spending commitments, in fact maybe even 23-24. So they chose to use their existing funding mechanisms to try and secure an early deployment of the hub. Whereas we've always been really clear that this is about getting ourselves prepared for the 25-26 spending round. So the reason why the Plymouth hub was pushed back in Parliament was because it was coming from a future budget, if you like. Ours has always been really clear, we need to do the work, and we'll be looking at the 25-26 spending round, which is heavily supported by NHS England in terms of the way forwards. So that's some of the mechanics of the kind of NHS finance, and I know we've got some time, I think 2nd of March, to talk through some of that in detail. So those are very different funding mechanisms.
But the NHS England accepted their business case, so as far as they were concerned, this was all running through, and there does seem to be some question over following, the mini budget. I don't think that's the right description, but what happened with trusts in autumn of last year actually has affected the real availability. There doesn't seem to be the capital there currently. Can you confirm that it will be available in the 24-25 spending review?
So nobody knows at the moment whether it will be or not. But NHSE is really clear about this being the route to primary care estate capital investment. So speaking to the lead within NHSE estates this morning, very clear that this is still the route for funding to be secured for the Cabell investment. And categorical.
Absolutely, there is going to be funding available.
Categorical that we are following the process with the expectation that the funding will be available and that there's no change to the context of that. But NHSE are really clear about encouraging us down that route. But it's the same with any form of NHSE investment in terms of not having an ability to understand the broader financial context. I couldn't sit here now and give you any commitment for any of the spending commitments in 25-26, but we are being clearly guided by NHS England that this is the route to funding.
I think Plymouth were clearly guided in a similar way, and the money wasn't available. But yeah, okay, I appreciate you don't know, but I think it's worth noting that, you know, they've actually gone quite a long way down right through to building works, and you're told the money's not there.
When that happened back in October, November, you'll understand that we had a little nervousness about what's happening here, what's going on, what's the cause of that. We've done our due diligence with them, and it was purely because they were going through the different funding route. There was no dilution of the NHS England commitments of 25-26 spending.
Heather, did you have a question?
I did, which isn't just about transparency. Right, I've got to remember what it was sitting here waiting. Originally I asked about how the weighting for each of these things was worked out, because you can weight things in different ways to get the outcome you want. Not that you would, of course, but and I'm not sure that I've seen that. I may have had it, and I've had so much health going through my brain, I've wiped it. But so how you actually have, if you have given it to me, can you share it again, because I can't find it? And I think that's really important for the transparency thing, especially around the impact. But it isn't just about access and impact, it's about how you get the site and all the different weightings, because the public are justifiably concerned about the best possible outcome from this, and that weighting could skew it. So I just remember asking about it, and I can't remember from my brain, but that's probably my brain.
So we definitely committed to that, but that was the weighting on the scenario. So whether and which of the 6 broader scenarios of whether it's a Cabell hub, whether it was my
Right, okay. Yeah. You've got it in this table here.
I'm sure we submitted it. Did we submit it?
For the
first
alternatives to.
Yes.
Yes, I thought we had.
We'll go away and check, Heather.
Okay, it's just the shortlist criteria. It's the shortlist criteria for shortlist that's on here.
Yeah.
And I didn't know whether it's that weighting or.
That weighting hasn't been.
No, so the weighting we committed to provide at the last meeting,
right, okay,
was around.
I'm still interested in this one.
So we can provide that.
That would be good, because again, it's a transparency thing.
Yeah, I'm the project board in a week or so. Once it's signed off, we'll be able to share that.
So if we disagreed with it, there's no way that we could have any input in on that, on that weighting issue on site.
Or we could reconsider it, couldn't we?
Yeah, that's it.
Okie doke, thank you. That's just something that popped out of one of your slides, and I similarly have questions for the services in a minute. So there we go. Thank you.
Okay, I'll hand over to Jackie for the second half.
Okay, just body screen goes off just as you're about to speak. Okay. So when we came to the last scrutiny meeting, there were some questions raised around the first round of the listening events, and there were concerns that not everybody who could have been engaged was engaged, and that's, you know, for lots of reasons, I guess. So I went away following that, and we undertook a gap analysis of, you know, who has engaged with us, and we were able to establish from there was some key targeted groups. And part of our public sector equality duty is that we make sure that we include these people that are really, really important in how we plan services. So we've gone back out with another round of engagement, and we're particularly targeting men, people from the LGBT community, expectant parents, young people kind of under 24, and more older people over 80. Now, we're working with partners to get to these cohorts of people. So, for example, working with the over 80s, we're working with a care provider who provides domiciliary care in the community and also in residential, because a lot of those elderly people, they'll have relatives who might want to comment about the care that's going to be provided locally, or similarly, it could be the carer who's paid to go in, who can actually help take those views and share them back, because people in that category, they need robust health services. So we need to understand what's important to those individuals. We've got links into a number of children and young people services, so that's really helpful. We've made links in now at the LGBT plus community organisations, and so that stakeholder mapping's completed and has started. The second thing that I think was important was this transparency of information. You're absolutely right, you know, everybody should know where it's all up to and what we're doing. So we produced an information hub bulletin, and that went out to every single patient in those practices. It's also in the practices, and we shared it with our voluntary and community sector partners to push it out. Because don't forget, it won't just be the people in those 6 practices who walk through that hub door. You know, you could get referred from another GP to go in and have your bloods done, or you know, if it's a near venue, and it won't be exclusive for those 6 practices. There will be other people who may be able to access community services. So it's important that we broadly share that information, and all of the practices have that available. And we also shared it with this stakeholder reference group, and so people were supportive of that. We've gone now to a number of community meetings, and we're joining in with other local events to share this process and let people know. And some clinical colleagues and indeed a couple of patients have also taken part in some short videos, which we'll be able to produce in the next coming weeks. Next slide, please. In terms of the potential services, when the first lot of engagement was undertaken, people were asked what was important to them in terms of accessing local kind of services, and all of these services that are listed here either came up from the public, or so for example the diagnostics has come from, you know, more of an NHS opportunity, but all of the services on here came from engaging with patients and the public. And what was helpful is that there was nothing there that couldn't be provided. And I think it's not that everything's going to be there all day, every day. It would be bookable spaces for some services. So, you know, for example, let's have a think. You know, for example, you might have your nutrition and dietary expertise. That could be every Wednesday or Thursday, and then on another Wednesday or Thursday, it could be a completely different service. So it's about using the space as well as providing a range of services. And what we want to do is talk more really when we do go back out to consult around these services and sense check, is this right? Is this what people really want? Is there something that's being missed? Is there things that we don't know that you think are important to know? Because I think that the conversation will be different because we all know the site. And we've also got the 6 practices who've agreed that this is their best option for them. And they will work with us to make sure every single one of their patients are notified of that. And that didn't happen the first time round. And I think that made a bit of an issue. So we've learned lots of lessons. And I think we are slowing this process down because we need to get it right. We don't want to be in a situation that people feel pushed through in a square peg and a round hole. There's no other option. You know, let's do it slowly and let's do it properly. So that's kind of the services. I think I thought it might be useful for Scrutiny colleagues just to get a bit of a flavour. Next slide, please. Sorry, of the reference group, the kind of questions that the reference group are asking. And as you know, it's made up of elected members, patient group representatives, PPG members, the community voluntary sector. So that, yeah, you know, they've asked the criteria scoring so far. So we've showed how the criteria was developed. We haven't showed the weighting, but obviously that will be something that will be shared with them once it's approved. They've asked about the decision-making process, you know, who signs this off and how does it work? So we shared that information that, you know, goes to board, then to the ICB, then to Scrutiny, and then, you know, decisions made. We asked if they were comfortable with the process being followed regarding the decision-making, and accepted that preferred site would be shared with the board for the decision to take place. And what they've said really was that, well, it's not ideal, but we understand it's not easy to find a suitable location and that there are commercial sensitivities to sharing it. So just, you know, similar to what Councillor Bentek said, you know, where are these places? We've had to say the same thing really around the commercial sensitivity, and the SRG, you know, they're not, you know, they're not opposed to it. They understand it's an important process. They asked about the criteria for the location in relation to deprivation and transport, and the travel impact assessment includes sustainable travel by road, public transport and on foot, and it is about considering the levels of deprivation, and we've also been able to secure for them all of the postcodes from all of the practices where patients are registered, so you can say how far people are away from it now, and let's for argument's sake say it's a hub down here, how much further that would be. Now for some people they might be here already and it's closer, and for others it might be a little further, but the important thing is it is capturing where everybody's coming from, and it does look at you know, those areas of deprivation, and again when you undertake a public consultation, you have to explain that process. You have to demonstrate how those reports would arrive at, and so that there's transparency in the process. I think in terms of where we are now to perhaps where we were, you know, 12 months ago maybe, I think the stakeholder reference groups really making a difference, listening to their comments and taking their feedback and sharing, you know, just sharing the process really. They're never straightforward, these things, you know, you've got to have dialogue, and you've got to be able to talk about the tricky issues. But I think it's important to say that people have really, these are quotes really that I took from the last meeting, that people are feeling, you know, the information that's being provided now and the way the sites are being shared, that people are more happy with that, and that there's been lessons learned regarding it, and you know that you're now open and engaged, and I wish it was like this from the beginning kind of thing people have said, but and others have said, you know, it shows the effort to step back, which is welcomed, and that the hope is another meeting with the SRG will be held further forward, and the stage 3 is reached, which is the, you know, the outcome of the options appraisal. And finally, you know, it's not just about operating the GP services, but also facility to offer other services. So I think in the beginning it was very driven around primary care GP services, and now people are, you know, fully understanding the concept of the hub. In terms of preparing for consultation, we'll plan a matrix model, so we'll need to do different methods depending on who we're trying to engage with. So if it's children and young people, you wouldn't do a death by PowerPoint, you know, event, because they won't come and they'll all be on the phone anyway. So we'll do something very interactive, and we'll work with our partners. You know, we'll piggyback on what they've got going on. We'll link in with older people's forums and groups, and people, you know, from the STEMS community. We'll make sure that the materials we produce are produced in easy read and accessible tools are made available for them. It will be a public facing document, as I'm sure you'll know. And finally, we've got a timeline that we would like to work to, but given the, you know, the latest delay in terms of the travel impact assessment, it could be around the summer, but it's not certain. Okay, and just in terms of the prep, following the outcome of the site options appraisal, we're planning to run for about 8 weeks and focus on those community services provided in a hub. Talked about providing it in alternative formats, and we'll host it on our website, and the accessibility tools are built into that, so you can have it in large print, different languages, and we'll have an easy read version. And we're asking the GPs, will they make sure it's on their websites, on their television screens, their own practices, and with a link so we can link straight back to our website for more information. We'll hold a series of public events, and they'll be proportionate really to the scale. And it'll be a mix and match, really, focus group, maybe some public meetings, maybe some drop-ins. We might do a bit of a Q&A panel session, or even a deliberative event. But we're in the process of looking at that now. And we also are required to bring in an external independent partner to undertake the analysis. And so they will help design the questions and undertake the analysis and provide an objective report back of the findings. And that's about it.
Lovely, thank you. So 2 hands went up. I think you're both dead heated. So we'll start with Nick and then go on to Heather.
Can I just go back to the list of potential services? I noticed that you used the word potential, which clearly is a fairly carefully chosen word. Is it likely to change significantly? I mean, might you, for example, include audiology, which isn't in the list?
It could change because the important thing. Oh, sorry. The important thing is that we hear what's important to the public, and also we need to do a piece of work which is work in progress around modelling, working with the providers of those services to find out what kind of accommodation they need. Do they need permanent office? Can they work flexibly in terms of booking space? And also the space available might not be big enough to house absolutely everything. So I think that's why we've used the word potential rather than that's going to be the definitive list.
It just comes back to a point which I think I've raised at a previous meeting, and you've confirmed that you will take referrals from outside the hub. I mean, I represent an area which is pretty close to Shrewsbury, outside Shrewsbury, Baschurch, the Prescott surgery in Baschurch. Now, at the moment, if you need audiology services, you go to Telford because there isn't a service anywhere in Shrewsbury. Now, I can well imagine that people like myself who need to go to audiology services now and again would much prefer to go to your site rather than trek over to Princess Royal. Now, that is going to have a direct impact on your car parking requirements because, you know, it's unlikely that there will be a bus service from Baschurch directly to the hub. So people will drive. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, isn't it? It's very difficult to establish the criteria. I mean, what assumption are you going to make about the numbers of referrals from other group practices to the new hub? Is it going to be 5%, 10%, 20%? I mean, it could make an enormous difference to the traffic impact assessment.
So if I may, then I might just, sorry, if I may, then I just aim to pick up. So the hub will be a resource for the whole of NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. Primarily, it is the co-location of 6 GP practices and the services that they will wrap around those. But where we, to use your example, were we to put audiology in, then that would become a resource for the whole of NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin to use, and quite right too for the scale of the facility that we're designing. But it's almost, as you say, it's a bit of a vicious circle in terms of how do you assess what you've got and what does that mean in terms of car parking, and then what does that mean in terms of the use of resources. That's work that will all be done as we go along, and we will try and work towards what our patients are telling us they want, what our services are telling us they need, the population needs that will play into that. And it will be a careful consideration and reconsideration of what that means for all of those things that you described. Now, there might be it's not an exact science. It might well be that we've got 6 rooms that we can then offer up for audiology, but audiology say, well, we actually need 8, and then we need to come up with a different way of working, or we can have 6 on one day and 4 on another day. Until we get to the footprint, until we know the site, then all of those are going to be moving parts. And there is a careful process that we'll need to work through to get that as good as we can. Now, I don't know if Emma can talk about where we are in that process yet, very early on, quite frankly. But until we know the location, until we know what that gives us in terms of footprint, until we know what that means in terms of capacity, and until we know what the patients are most interested in, all of that is a bit of a melting pot for us to try and get to the right answer. But what we will do is we will take that answer to our patients and to the public for influence and involvement.
I mean, I guess I'm just like Bernie, urging you not to provide a very small car park because I think you might need a very large car park. But I see the problem.
Yeah.
That leads very neatly on to something I was going to say, which is actually the government's drive is towards diagnostic centres. And at the very, very beginning of this, I do remember that the funding for this was only going to be for diagnostic centres, your predecessor told us.
Okay.
And it does now appear, and I said to him, if that's the case, then the siting of whatever it is needs to take into consideration the rest of the county. And we are only consulting with your patients from these GP practices at present. So if the rest of the county could well end up coming here, this is a much, much bigger project. And actually, the accessibility is really, really important, even more important than just for your 6 practices. It also means that the size of that site for expansion, which you did refer to, is vitally important. And it isn't just building on the car parking spaces when you need extra space. So there are a whole raft of things in there that seem to be coming back to this will be a diagnostic centre for the county. So from what you've just said, I've got some more bits. Do you want those first?
Let me pick up the diagnostic side first. Yeah. We're very fortunate in the county as a whole that we have 2 big pieces of investment coming in. One is the potential investment in the Cavell Centre. We also have just had secured the investment around the Community Diagnostic Centre, which will be based in Telford, and that's looking to come on stream in the early part of the next financial year. That's part of.
Is that for the whole county in Telford?
So, well, predominantly yes. So, but it's part of a broader programme of work where the government has requested community diagnostic centres to be set up in multiple locations. The Telford one is the first one that we've been able to resource within Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. The government policy is really clear about expanding and increasing the number of those. And as we become clear on the funding mechanisms, we may be able to attract some of that to the western part of the north and south part of the counties. This won't be a community diagnostic centre in that right. This is going to be a primary care hub for GP practices, and it may have an element of diagnostic services, but this isn't going to suddenly become a community and diagnostic centre in the way that you might be familiar with the Telford and Wrekin.
Right. Yes. And the geography of those other ones will be a whole different ballgame when they come back to us, because just putting something in Shrewsbury doesn't deal with the county. And I'll just put that marker down for you now.
I chose my words in terms of Shrewsbury North and South carefully. So.
Good. And Ludlow isn't the south necessarily either. There we go. So that brings me to my next point. Well, there are a couple of points. One, you were going to look at the impacts. You've got pharmacy on here as one of the services. And you were going to look from the last meeting at the impacts on those other pharmacies who are attached now to the 6 GP practices and what that will do to their business model. And I haven't seen that, so I'll be really interested to see how that's going to work out for those people who at the moment pop into them with their scripts and get their drugs on site. So it's eminently sensible you have a pharmacy on this site, but it will take away business from those existing businesses. So what was the next thing? We have a number of other areas that presumably this model could be rolled out to if it works well, or will this be the one that you expect to serve the whole of Shrewsbury, or would Shrewsbury need another one? Because you're looking at populations and GP practices, you would expect that to be the case. What I'm also interested in is practices like Pontesbury and Wortham, who may well be shifting more and more of their the services to this hub, and that begins because they already were sending people to Seven Fields and all sorts. That really begins to impact those local GP surgeries and how they work and what they do, and that management is going to be very careful. Will have to be very carefully managed if you're going to be providing some of these services on this site that they could buy into. Because for people getting from the south, the rural south, to any of these sites for their phlebotomy, for their this, that and the other, because phlebotomy is a problem across the county, as we know, then the impacts of this hub are much wider than just for Shrewsbury. And that's why I'm interested. I'm also interested in whether there might be any possibility for the future that actually we look at places like Bishop's Castle and the hospital, where we now know that people have just walked away because they've told the staff they're never going back there. They removed most of the community, the beds and so on. And yet we're consulting on the 1st of March. So this is why I'm really keen on transparency for all of this and looking at future plans. And we also know that they've recruited from abroad or specific community hospital sites and all of those things. So the future of those buildings and how they are impacted by this hub and the services they might suck in is really important, really important.
Yeah, that's a really, really valid point, Councillor. And just to reassure council members that we've been doing some work over the last 6 to 9 months with individual practices and the primary care networks to determine their estate's needs, not just now, but into the future, and how they want to grow and expand. And we should have that finished by the summer, which will then help us to answer your question around, well, what after this? What about other areas? What do they need? How will they work in this way?
So this will not be a threat to other areas. That's my real problem.
So I think there's 2 parts to that.
Yeah.
So this is a pilot process. There are 6 schemes around the country with the direction of travel from the primary care national team that this is the route towards the future of GP practices. For all of the reasons that we've discussed that I won't go into again, but we have covered on a number of occasions. So actually, one of the things, the tank site will actually help with primary care and GP provision going forwards. I think there are specific examples. You use the Pontesbury and Wortham one, given it's just kind of northwest of where the hub might be. You can see how there may well be a greater attraction for Pontesbury and Wortham services to be provided out of the hub, where you can get access to audiology, first contact physios, phlebotomy in a way that they don't currently have. But again, I would see that as an extension of their current services rather than the replacement of, and that's something that the GPs will need to consider very carefully as they develop this. So for me, this is adding to services rather than taking away. But the core tenet behind it is that this is the route forward for primary care services going forward. So I think it will help.
And that was my assumption. I'm just always concerned that we suck into the centre for everything, and then sparsely populated areas end up with actually less, and the access is even more difficult because we don't then, even when you're adding on, then look at those impacts, the travel impacts and so on that we need, because you've already put something in place, and so the addition is just an addition. We don't look at actually the impacts for the rest of it and those rural people.
Okay, Kate, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to start by saying, in terms of engagement, I think things have improved. So I do thank the team. I know I have tendency to be critical of the actual scheme itself, but I do acknowledge, you know, you have really improved things. So I welcome that. I think there's still ways to go, but it looks like you've been attempting to address that. Most of the points I was going to make, Councillor Kidd has made, so thank you. But I did just want to make one wider point on travel, which is that, you know, we have the local transport plan coming up. We're currently quite far ahead with a mini Holland transport bid, which is very likely to have pilots within the red circle that you've identified. Those pilots will be looking to try and reduce car travel in those areas. There's also a movement strategy going on in Shrewsbury, and I'm just wondering how much there's the big town plan as well. Will these because it's changed a bit now. If we're going to be dealing with the whole of the county, will this mean a dramatic increase in travel through the town centre, for example? So I think there are quite a lot of transport things going on that you really need to carefully be aware of in terms of the location of this site.
If I just before Jackie comes in, sorry, I want to be careful about how we describe the potential use of the GP hub for outside of the GP practices. If we determine that audiology is a good service to have within the hub, and that has the ability to accept more capacity than just the GP practices that are there, then of course we will do that. But this isn't suddenly going to become some form of quasi hospital that's going to be dragging patients in from all over the county. If it's a sensible operational, clinical, patient-focused thing to do, then that service will be made available more broadly. But it's not going to substantially change the nature of services from outside of those six GP practices. But it will have an impact. But it's not at that level. I wouldn't want to create an image that it's suddenly a sub-hospital type facility.
But all the same, in a sense, you're saying if it's sensible to us, if we think this is a good idea, it will go ahead. But there are a whole raft of other things. If it goes ahead in a low traffic neighbourhood, for example, which some of these neighbourhoods might well be, then that's going to be in contrast with Shropshire Council's plan and the climate emergency. It's also going to make it really difficult for patients to actually get to the travel hub. So I think your answer in a way said we'll go ahead with it if we think it's a good idea. But that kind of gives an example of, I guess, the lack of looking at how this impacts the whole systems locally.
Perhaps Insurance Council today, we're working with the Shropshire Council Transport team and the company working on the impact of actually undertaking this, didn't we?
Sorry, can't really hear at all.
Oh, sorry. Shows a bit more.
Yeah.
So the providers are called WSP, and they provided a number of services for your council and went through a robust procurement process. And the managers of those transport service plans have been working with MRI to ensure really we've got somebody that they felt was reliable, robust, and will do what's needed, and that they have already a very strong knowledge of the infrastructure and what plans are going forward. So it's not a single entity piece of work. It's most certainly considering all of those issues. And thank you very much for telling me your team, because we couldn't have done it without them.
Okay, Bernie, we're not going over same ground again.
No,
point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to hear that Telford have received funding for a community diagnostics centre, and it'd be great to know what the level of funding was, because that might influence the amount of money that might be sought for a Shrewsbury diagnostic hub. And you have said, Gareth, that this should be primarily considered as a primary care centre for the 6 GP surgeries. And so the second half of the presentation on what additional services might be provided, you suggested that principally it would be for those 6 GP surgeries. And so in terms of providing a community diagnostic hub, it's going to be very small capacity in relation to the total needs of Shropshire, as opposed to Telford and Wrekin. And so should we now be talking about what should be going into a proper community diagnostic centre for Shropshire County, as opposed to Telford and Wrekin, because a lot of these additional facilities are going to be very small capacity. And I'm concerned particularly about the weight management facilities, which should be a primary concern for Shropshire Health Services, and for which you've suggested the facilities should only be for pre-operative assessment or preparation for operations in your presentation. And there were some particular conditions that seem to have disappeared from the list that was provided originally. So, for example, cardiology, hypertension, and diabetes, which are all really important clinical conditions to deal with, seem to have disappeared from the list. And in terms of diagnostics, the big weights are not for X-rays and ultrasound; they're for MRIs and CTs. And that doesn't seem to be discussed or mentioned in the presentation. So my concern is that these additional services are presented as a carrot, but in fact there are many carrots, because the capacity won't be enough to deal with the population that need it.
I don't mean to be obtuse, but I'm not clear on the question.
Well, the question is, at what level of diagnostic service to the county as a whole, to Shropshire, is this going to provide? Because it looks like it's going to be minimal, and the government is clear that we need a rapid increase in diagnostic centres, and indeed has funded about 200 of them, but there isn't one for Shropshire.
I think we're conflating two issues. So I'm trying to be really clear that this isn't a diagnostic centre. This is a primary care service. The work around community diagnostic centres is an entirely different part of the work that goes underway as part of NHS Shropshire and Wrekin, and I wouldn't conflate the two issues. If we create the opportunity for diagnostic images, diagnostic activity here as part of the consultation process we'll go through, that may well be an appropriate use. But I wouldn't conflate this with a diagnostic centre in the same way that is currently being developed at Telford and Wrekin.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, I think we've done that to death now, and you'll move on to the next stage and come back to us in March, I think you said, didn't you? So,
can we have the impact on the pharmacies as well, please? Which I asked for before.
Yeah, so I think we took that to the Pharmacy Liaison Committee following the last request. But again, it's slightly tied up with until we know where, until we know what, then I'll check the notes of the Liaison Committee to see the content of that discussion, but they're an important part of the stakeholder reference group.
okay, can I thank you guys for turning up again and putting the information in front of us, and yeah, it seems a smoother process now. We're certainly transparent anyway, so
okay,
thank you. Okay, we'll move rapidly on to the work programme before we run out of time. So Tom.
Thank you. So in terms of the work programme, we're primarily focused on the next meeting in March, and I think that then there's an opportunity for the committee to start to think about resetting or refocusing the work programme for the coming year and beyond as well. And we might plan that back into what's being done, certainly within the council, to deliver the priorities which are set out in the Shropshire Plan, but also to take account of some of the big developments which are occurring in the environment around us as well as a local authority. So if I've interpreted that right, they're going to be looking to move to complete some of the assessment and then move to the consultation in the summer rather than the spring. this year. So the Health and Wellbeing Hub, for example, will continue to be very much in scope. So that one's not going to go away. But in terms of the work programme topics for the March meeting, we obviously have the Health and Wellbeing Hub on there for that meeting, and it's going to be potentially part closed, depending on whether there's commercial sensitivity, and part in open session to talk about some of those sort of wider issues which can be covered there, and we'll hopefully be in a position where things are more tightened down and clearer. Depending on when they launch the ambulance, so the Welsh Air Ambulance consultation, it might be that I bring back a draft for this committee in terms of a statement which goes, or if not, I'll have to circulate that before. So there's potentially an item there on that as well. We also have the opportunity to include, I think, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, health and all strategies and the replacements. So there's, I think we're about 12 months on since the last update that you received as a committee on that. So I think it's a progress and impact update. But I will pick that up with Rachel and her teams just to see whether that's going to be better done as a briefing session, or whether it's something that you can get into and scrutinise in the meeting as well. And the other item that I've got down, and it might be one you keep as a watching brief, and in part the conversation today has just reminded me to make sure that we bring it forward, is we were going to look at rural proofing, particularly in relation to the developments around health services in Shropshire. And we wanted as a committee to have a backward view at the end of the year. So obviously some of the conversations from today would lead me to believe that you'll have views that you'll want to be expressing and making strong views on when it comes to that. And I think when it comes to your look back on what's happened this year, when it comes to your statements to council sometime in the next municipal year, that would be the type of thing that you'd want to have featuring in there as well. So main items I've got then are looking at the Health and Wellbeing Hub. I think that's going to be the substantial piece next meeting in March. We'll be looking at potentially rural proofing, or agreeing how we want to address that as a committee, potentially a response to their ambulance consultation, depending on when that actually starts and timing wise, whether that lands in that time frame, and possibly the health and all strategies and replacements update in terms of impact and progress. See where it is. So those are the main focus that I've got on.
Sure. Can I bring up a different issue for future consideration? And am I on or off?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think this is suitable for March, because I think it's going to take more time than we've got available between now and March. And this is triggered really partly by my experience and having listened to the impassioned tale from Councillor Kidd earlier this morning about the mental health issues in Shropshire. It's long been well known, I think, that the mental health services in Shropshire are in disarray and failing. And I think it's high time that we as a committee took a serious look at that. And not just for adults either. I know there's another committee that looks after children, but this is across the board. And I'm speaking from the point of view of I chair the pupil disciplinary committee at one of the schools, doesn't matter which one. And the number of cases that are coming before us now, where intervention by mental health teams at an early stage would have resolved the issue. And these young people are being excluded, their lives potentially ruined, because there is not the service to support them within the county. And it's absolutely appalling. And Heather no doubt will say her piece about the adult side. So please say not for March, because you'll need a little bit of thought about how we're going to approach it, but for a future meeting, and please have that on the agenda. Thank you.
I think it has been raised previously. It's on
and it's got no better.
Yeah, I mean, certainly as well. We have to balance this out with the joint health scrutiny as well when we look at this. So absolutely, if there's scope for us to look at it from a Shropshire Council area perspective, and we can pick up some of those issues and use that to inform the joint health scrutiny work, I think that would be powerful.
Yeah.
It's getting that right, but it's recognising that actually when it comes to anything that's system wide, it's the joint health scrutiny that's going to have the power to call in those NHS providers.
Yeah. Understood, but I think we ought to tackle it.
Yeah, Heather.
I would agree with that, absolutely, but it does come usually under joint health scrutiny, and but I do think there might be an area where we could actually just collect some of those items that all councillors pick up. You know, I had it during lockdowns, a woman who really, we had to fight tooth and nail to get her sectioned again because they didn't want her back. There are all those things where we've all got examples that we could feed into and just put that together to send to joint post. So that would be, I think, a valuable thing that the committee could do, but maybe not in session, just collect them.
Yeah, good. Really?
Great. No, I haven't finished. No.
Hold your breath.
I was just picking up something there which I thought was useful. I think that actually we do need to look at how adult social care is going to achieve the budget savings, because they are significant. And I really think as a scrutiny committee we ought to be looking at how that's going to happen for the future. I did actually ask last meeting about that. So please can we look at that? And it may be that they're just not possible, and looking around the things that are happening to health and care at the present time, I think they're going to be really difficult, but I think we as a committee ought to be aware of where they're coming, how it's going to be achieved and so on. And the other one is the rural proofing, and I think we really need, as part of that rural proofing, to look at the way the integrated care strategy is being rolled out, because I think before, and having listened to the Health and Wellbeing Board, before actually much of that's been adopted, the individual parts of the health service are dismantling things so that they don't have to do things that are in the ICS. And I'm really concerned about that. And what's gone on in Bishop's Castle Hospital is a good example of that. And there's, oh, we'll work with you. No, they don't. They just want to keep fobbing us off. If they worked with us, we might be able to come forward with something sensible. Rural proofing would actually mean that the local members were not continually put on hold, shifted down the line, and only talked about after they've actually destroyed something. There are other options. There are other ways of delivering health in rural areas, and quite frankly, they don't want to know. And they don't want to talk to us. So actually, rural proofing of what the ICS is doing and what the individual partners who don't turn up to the Health and Wellbeing Board, that includes the Community Health Trust, actually are trying to do before we get to the full implementation.
Heather, would it be helpful on that rural proofing if we did a task and finish group and scoped it down? It's a big piece of work to shoehorn into something. Just wondering if you would like to do a task and finish group to condense that thinking in before bringing it back to committee?
That would be fine, but it depends on the capacity of officers always. Because I really think there's a quick and dirty bit to do and then a bigger bit of work to do on it, because if we're not at all careful, the very things that we need to keep in the north and the south that actually are in our rural areas will be gone before we've got to doing anything else. And the Fuller report has been shelved. They're not interested in the Fuller report, just not interested. So please.
I was just going to say, talking not being interested, it's not that we're not interested.
No, it's not.
I know it's very passionate to you, and it'd be good to get some very rural aspects.
The quick and dirty bit is actually, can you rural proof this to the things they are doing by the back door, quite frankly? And then the rest of it is a much bigger piece of work where we're looking at every part of it. And I mean, care services in rural areas are so difficult. so difficult to actually roll out, and there's a huge piece of work just to do around all of that. So I can just see that there's a shorter term bit which would hold the ICB to account, and a bigger bit that actually looks at other things.
Tom, your thoughts? Yeah, so my initial thoughts, particularly thinking about capacity, is that I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that when we meet next, I'll have another team member who will be working with this committee, the Joint Health Scrutiny Committee. And this would be probably quite a nice topic to bring them in on. But my initial thoughts are, it would be useful to get an understanding from the members in the room who would be interested. And I'm going to call it task and finish because it's scrutiny, but it would be a quick and dirty piece to start with, which is almost a scoping conversation about what are the issues. So if we wanted to put questions to the ICS or to other health partners, what is it, or to Tanya and to Rachel from an internal perspective, what are the things you want to ask questions about? And what is it we're looking to get as answers in relation to those? And then we can work out the best step forward, because I don't think we'll be able to do this at the meeting on the 27th. And I don't know whether you want to do it in a public meeting to start with, and then, or whether you actually want to meet, clarify exactly what you want to ask questions on, invite the right people to a meeting, and then really work through what those things are. It almost is bigger than just a look back on rural proofing. This is almost, we do the look back on rural proofing and we kick on with a defined topic for the coming year.
Getting scoping, otherwise it's just going to balloon out all directions.
But we managed to do that with ambulance services, which became a much bigger thing. But we did do that in the task and finish group, and it worked very well.
Did the same thing this time.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't restrict it to this committee. You put it out to all members who are, roll it as they come, as you have this.
Yeah, sorry. I think getting a sense from this committee, because this is where it's starting from. But absolutely, it wouldn't be restricted to just the committee, and I think the engagement of the members is part of the work.
Yeah.
Bernie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of points. The first is that I wonder, should we be asking in particular the secondary care sector, but also primary care sector, to provide us with a regular dashboard of where they are in certain important areas, and these items can change. So things such as the ambulance response times and the numbers of patients that are still in hospital after discharge, because we have to go around finding that information rather than being presented to us for scrutiny. And in other scrutiny committees in other parts of the country, that sort of information is regularly available to that committee. And I'm happy to liaise with Rachel and Tom and anybody else who would like to, about what should be on that dashboard, so that we can get an early warning sign of issues as they develop, rather than having what happened in the past, which was exemplified by the Ockendall inquiry, where the services in maternity suddenly hit the headlines rather than coming before this committee at an earlier stage and being influenced by this committee. The second is in relation to Highley, where the practice is, as everybody knows, going up for tender in terms of providers. And at this stage, I'm not sure that any of us know what the size of facility it's going to be, where it's going to be, and just as importantly, who is going to be providing the service? Is it going to be a private medical firm that will be providing the services? Because if so, we need to know, and we need to know the scope of the contract. So certainly for the near future, I'd be grateful if Highley was on the agenda, and if we could receive an update before the next meeting to know where we are. Rachel might have some information for us.
Thank you. So we have been providing an update outside of these meetings to Health and Wellbeing board members and to HASC when we've had them on Highly. So I will ask for a further update. I'm aware things have, over the last few weeks, there's been more activity around that. But just to provide that reassurance to and for those questions to inform scrutiny. So we are aware, based on the work that's been done on the area around the joint strategic needs assessment, that work's completed. There's been a working group involving local councillors, the town council, the primary care facility practitioners, as well as the ICS have been involved in working in that area to look for a solution, as well as the expression of interest process that for primary care that runs separately. And obviously colleagues have left, but so I'll get an update in terms of what we can share publicly around what's happening with the primary care. But I'm assured that we do not expect there to be a gap in provision. That's being worked through at the moment, as well as the work in Highly to look at what can be provided from within Highly. But we've sent updates outside the meeting. I'll get a further update to members of this committee, and we'll ask that to be brought forward and keep you updated.
Thank you, Rachel. And the dashboard for all the items.
Okay, so a lot of what you're describing, Bernie, is already publicly available. And it's going to be the timing of when that's published as to whether it's giving that human perspective. I'll have a conversation with Rachel and with Tanya, because for me the question to balance out with this is, do we go to the ICS and ask them to produce the dashboard, or if we've got an in-house team who does this kind of development, whether they could be doing that? Because I think that it came after the task and finish group work, the ambulance response times. When we look at discharges, for example, I'll give that an example. We need to make sure that when it comes to this committee, get a view of what has been defined as a delayed discharge from the hospital. But I think you also need to get a view from the council of what an actual discharge of someone would be, where they meet that criteria. It was a really, really clear focus from the task and finish group work. So I just want to make sure when you get it, you've got that whole picture, so that you're able to, as a committee, see all sides of that discussion.
Thank you. The definitions are quite clear, and they are published on the CITREC data, which is published weekly for discharges. But the ambulance data, I'm not sure. It's more produced on an annual basis, and we need a regular update.
We should be taking away. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's nice. We'll work over the notes.
No, I think that's it for the work programme. In fact, I think we're kicking on into next year as well.
Okay. Next meeting, 27th of March. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go.
Before this week.
Yeah, email me.